All right, guys. Hopefully, got this set up to work correctly here, but we're going to be going live, and this is an Ask Me Anything of it again. And sorry about doing this on a Monday. As it turns out, this was the only day of the week, just based on my travel schedule around the state, that I could do it. So I appreciate everybody logging in and asking me any questions that you might have. I'll do my best to answer them. And just to kind of get the show on the road here, it's been an odd, it's been a busy week since the last time that I did a live stream, and last week, and a number of things have happened since then, just as just kind of an interesting personal side of things. My car broke down. I had my computer broke down, and I had a washing machine break down at the house, all in the same week. And I was at least able to disassemble my laptop and get the old hard drive out and download it, which is, I already had it backed up and stuff, but it's always a good idea to keep that handy. And my car had a real stupid reason as to why it broke down, which maybe I'll get into later in the video for those of you who spend time working on cars that are well past their probably sell-by date. And on the my washing machine, it was an old one. I can't even remember where I got it, but I ended up taking it apart as well, and I was able to fix, at least according to the way a YouTube video would say you're supposed to fix a machine, but it looks like that's just not good enough. And we have a bunch of teenagers at home right now, so I got a feeling we've just been using it so much, it's just seen its last days. But anyway, so that was the week for me. This weekend, they had or actually last Friday, they had the Thurston County, basically the long delayed meeting where they were going to basically determine who's going to go to the county convention, which is coming up February 15th. And so it ended up being it wasn't super eventful, a little harder. We did a middle school. They had it scheduled for a middle school in Olympia. And remember, it had been canceled because of cold weather at the Olympia High School in January. So that's why they had to delay it and do it in February. And it ended up being a good event. Saw a lot of you guys there. There were a couple of you that watched these live streams that did come up and talk to me, so I always appreciate that. And I was elected there to be the clerk, which was our secretary for that event, which ended up being pretty much a non-entity because we really didn't do a lot of. There wasn't a lot of voting going on. It was just simply mostly people. Just the attendance was enough that you had a lot of different precincts that had representatives there, but it wasn't like there was a huge contentious fight in any given precinct for much of anything. And so they didn't give us enough tables, and they should have had a few more chairs there. It would have been handy. But all in all, it worked out okay, and I saw a lot of you there, and it was fun to see as many people as I did. And let me just give a quick update, as I tried to in the beginning of the show, just to give a sense of where I'm going to be at over the next couple weeks, so that if you happen to be near any of these speaking engagement locations, come on up, say hi. Make sure you introduce yourself so I know who you are, and always appreciate seeing people who are willing to kind of be out in the field and come up and say hi. The next event, which will actually be tomorrow, and the reason why we're doing a live stream tonight instead of Tuesday, I'm going to be up in Skagit County with the Skagit Women's Republican Club at starting about 10 a.m. At least I'll probably be there maybe a little earlier than that. And they have their regular meetings. I think their original speaker canceled, and since I was already going to be up in that area that day, tomorrow anyway, we kind of organized something. I won't be able to stay around late. I'm just going to be doing a presentation and speaking to the group there, and probably leaving pretty close to like 10:30, 10:45, maybe 10:45, something like that. I'm going to be heading up to my next speaking engagement, which is going to be at the Whatcom Women's Republican Club meeting at the Bellingham Country Club at noon. I'll probably get there a little early, so if you are there early, I'll see you there. Now, at that event, I'll be staying later, and I know I have a number of other meetings with activists up in the Whatcom County area that I'm not advertising specifically for, but at the Women's Republican Club meeting, I'll see you then if you're interested. Then Thursday, February 8th, I'll be at the Reset Church, 6 p.m. in Marysville. I actually get there a little early, so and it sounds like you want to get there a little early if you're interested in that event. That event is mostly focused on trying to do like a teaching school board members, new school board members, or perhaps helping school board members get together and kind of just compare notes on things they can and cannot do as school board members to make a difference in their school district. Hopefully, mostly an emphasis on what they can do, and I imagine that there'll be a lot of Q&A and give and take in that particular event. 2 days later, Saturday, I'll be up in San Juan County speaking at the Republican Convention that day. So even though I'd mentioned the Thurston County Caucus this last Saturday, this is basically the county convention for San Juan County. So I'll be speaking there. Got a lot of friends up in San Juan County. And so I'm looking forward to seeing you if you happen to be up there around that time. But that is that day, February 29th, I'm going to be speaking in Okanagan. I don't have a lot of details on that yet. Tegan, if you're watching this live stream, let me know exactly where and what time I'm going to be speaking. But that's a Thursday. I'm assuming it's in the evening. And so I'll be over there in Eastern Washington that day. And then March 2nd, I will be the MC at the Lewis County Lincoln Day Dinner in Chehalis, I believe. And March 9th, which is the following Saturday, I'll be in Kitsap County also at a Lincoln Day Dinner there. So if I remember right, I think the Lewis County Lincoln Day Dinner on the 2nd is going to have Ari Hoffman and Jonathan Cho. So I think I'm organizing like a panel presentation that they're doing at that event. So it'll be great. Again, if you're at any of these events or anywhere nearby and you want to be there and come up and say hi, please make sure you do so, especially if you regularly watch my channel or these live streams. Those are all opportunities to meet in person. And I think I've mentioned to people before, I do a lot more public presentations, and really that's my experience more with activism in Washington State, going back 14, 15 years now, with just going and doing live presentations, Q&A, training, activism training, things like that. There's other events I'm doing that I don't report when I'm giving you my kind of my rundown of where I'm going to be, that are more private meetings with activists, helping them train, or other types of events. And obviously, if I'm doing any work on whistleblower stuff, I'm not talking about that. But generally, this just gives you a sense of where I'll be at over the next couple days. So if you happen to be there too, please make a point again of coming up and saying hi. If you got questions you want to ask me in person that you're not willing to ask on the live stream for some reason, feel free to come up and ask me then. And so you have lots of opportunities to come up and chat with me depending on where I am in the state. I know if you live in Spokane or the Tri-Cities, I anticipate being out there for a couple of events coming up, but I just don't have those off the top of my head right now. I think those are in March later, although I know I've been working on an event up in the Tri-Cities for a while that we just haven't really, I think, formalized, or at least I just didn't have it in my notes here before we got started. So with that, this is an Ask Me Anything event. I live stream as always, so hopefully I can do my best to answer any of the questions that you might have. There's a lot going on right now. In theory, the cutoff for new bills in the legislature was last week. There are a couple other updates I do have on stories. I did 2 videos today. One video is kind of a takeoff of the story that Jason Rantz had publicized last week, and especially over the weekend, about the $460 million that was diverted from COVID relief funds into and given to illegal aliens in Washington State. It was a lot, actually. $460 million, even by Washington State standards, is a lot of money. And remember, those COVID relief funds theoretically were there to actually help people, citizens, and businesses that were struggling. But of course, instead, what they did is diverted it to people who were not even U.S. citizens that were here, and that $460 million is a lot. So that diversion of funds is pretty significant. It was a good story, and I did a fairly long video on it. Not so much about the specific diversion of the funds to illegals, but also just the overall aspect of government funding in general that it reveals, and some other issues that I kind of tied into that video. I also did a short video on the kind of a follow-up to the request that had been made last week by legislators out of the 35th Ledge District to Bob Ferguson, asking him to actually investigate the fraud out of the North Mason, or the Mason Fire District number 12 saga, which I've done a video on before if you've been watching this channel. So I did a quick kind of an update video there. It wasn't a long one, but I anticipate both those videos launching in the next couple days. And when they do, you get a chance to watch them and then give me some feedback and let me know what you think. So and again, I always love it if people just mention where they're logging in from. I've had people watching from Auckland, New Zealand, which seemed interesting to me, and other places as well. So I'm always kind of curious people who are watching and what their opinion is on the issues of the live stream. Now, because I'm doing this on a Monday night instead of the regularly scheduled Tuesday night, I would anticipate that either we have some different people watching tonight, maybe couldn't make it normally on Tuesdays, or just people that were kind of into the habit of seeing me do these on Tuesdays, and so they're not ready for them on Mondays. I do try to put it up and schedule it on our live stream, and I did make the announcement last week that this week I was going to have to do this schedule just because of all the speaking engagements that I'm going to be scheduled to speak at elsewhere. But hopefully that gets us started. And again, if you're going to ask a question, try to do the We the Govern. It just makes it easier for me to spot the questions here if we have a lot of comments on the just in the pop-up chat here. So let's get started here. I'm going to start with a first question here from Andrea K. A couple weeks ago, you mentioned looking into election issues here in Spokane and other places. Really curious about what's going on. And of course, going back below that, yeah, looks like you had another question there, Andrea, or at least you're making some commentary about it, saying that we had one of the white powder incidents during the November election, which turned out to be fentanyl, turned out to be fentanyl in our case. Haven't heard a peep about any investigation. Okay, that's good to know, actually. So, I mean, here's the thing with, there were quite a few of these stories that popped up this last election, 2023 election, in a couple different auditors' offices. I know Skagit was one of them, Spokane was one of them, and a couple others where they had bags of white powder that showed up at the auditor's office. And it was a big deal. I mean, ever since the anthrax scares of 2001, it's usually not a good plan to send white powder through the mail unless you want a lot of attention. And of course, that's probably what the people wanted. So they sent in white powder, and some of that white powder at least had fentanyl. I was aware of the Skagit County report on their auditor's office having some fentanyl in it. It doesn't take very much for it to be a problem in the sense of, because it takes such a small amount that it could kill you. So I don't know that it was at what level it really was with the powder that was sent to Skagit County, but I know they detected fentanyl there. I didn't hear more details about Spokane, so I'm not completely sure what you've experienced out there in Spokane, but I can ask some people who are engaged out in the Spokane and they're observers in the Spokane auditor's office. So I imagine I'll probably learn a little bit more about that from them. The biggest challenge, you were talking about election issues. Gosh, Spokane had a terrible election just recently. City of Spokane did. City of Spokane just put some terrible people in the city council. So you got a full corruption crew there right now, operating on, led by Lisa Brown. I'm just expecting corruption to pretty much be unlimited and unleashed within that city, since everybody that likes the corrupt people who grift off the state just got elected. So you really just got a whole city council of really bad people. Nadine Woodward, who was a former mayor that lost the election for mayor, is unlikely. I mean, as much as people were critical of her maybe for some things, there's no doubt that compared to Lisa Brown, who was the former head of the Department of Commerce under Jay Inslee, and who lost her effort to try to go to Congress when she challenged Catherine Morris Rogers a few years ago, and who before that was actually a state senator out of the 3rd legislative district, which is mainly urban Spokane. So Lisa Brown gets in as your new mayor out there, and she's just really corrupt. I mean, you really got an exceptional, a person that thrives on corruption, really, and that's her entire history of her political career. one of the things that she did while she was at the Department of Commerce is divert an inordinate amount of grant money from the Department of Commerce to Spokane, substantially disproportionate to their population or to any other city that she was sending money to, or at least attempting to divert money from the Department of Commerce. She was instrumental and really active, involved in doing this. And it's a great way to kind of bribe your way through whoever you want to get on your side to help you with an election process. And maybe it's legal, it's certainly unethical, but that's how she rolls. And so we've already had some problems in Spokane, right? Especially with some of these homeless industrial complex groups out there. There's the Fools for Jewels scandal related to Jewels Helping Hands. It's just another group of con artists that basically, get grant money from the county or from anybody they can, but usually a city. They claim that they're helping homeless people, but mostly what they do is they spend it on themselves. It was interesting to note that they're the ones that got exposed with the website out there on the ball509.com, which is a great website for Spokane. And they exposed the Jewels Helping Hands crew, basically get this grant money and essentially spend almost all that money. Now, it's all fungible, right? They'll say it's a different pot of money they drew from, but they flew down to Las Vegas and spent it on fancy meals and hotels and getting spanked by a sexy nurse. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. They took photos of themselves, bragged about it on social media, and then meanwhile they're handing out expired food out of rusty cabinets and claiming that they're really solving problems. If you get $1 million from the city of Spokane to solve homelessness, and homelessness only gets worse. I realize that for these grant grifters, that's success because it just means you're going to get more money in the future. But most people would probably not view that as being very successful. I was out in Spokane just a couple weeks ago in the snow and just watching all these drug addicts passed out or, in really dire straits on the street, knowing they're just being subsidized and recruited to congregate in Spokane so that these grant grifting operations can keep getting their funding. It's not a good thing. And if you live in Idaho and think that you're going to escape this, you're wrong. Spokane's not that far away, and the same grant grifting groups keep pushing them and working it into Idaho as well. So the elections out there have always been an issue. The auditor in Spokane is not particularly good. She has, under her watch, there's been fraudsters working in her office, right, that she should have caught before. But more than that, she's really tried to do her best to make it as untransparent and as impossible to audit as any auditor in the state. She tries to compete, I think, with King County in that regard. So you got some issues out there on that when it comes to the election integrity side of things. Jason, you got a question here about Denver Post article about gun control was once electoral kryptonite. Now Colorado Democrats are emboldened. A bunch of bills there that are also being submitted in Colorado. There are. And I didn't read that particular article out of Colorado, although there was a similar article, I believe, that was made. It was actually produced here in Washington as well because particularly in the 90s, there had been a strong movement that the Democrats were getting behind with Brady Bill and in Washington State where they were trying to do restrictions on handguns, and they actually ran an initiative that just got crushed in the 90s, right around the time that the Democrats lost it was the largest flip, overturned seats in the House and Congress state legislature and Congress in Washington State history. And so after that happened, generally the Democrats stayed away from trying to destroy Second Amendment rights or reduce your freedoms. They've always been kind of the pro-crime party. They do always seem to support finding ways of unleashing more criminals, and especially violent criminals, in the community. They certainly don't want them locked up. But they had stayed away from that being an open part of how they self-identify just until the last few years. We really saw this starting with 594, I want to say in 2012 was when they started to come back. To some extent, you kind of can't hide who you are. And so when they were pushing that bill on, it had to do with the ability to transfer firearms. And there was a competing bill which made it confusing. I worked at the Freedom Foundation at the time. I remember I took hundreds of calls on this. And the Second Amendment Foundation did a good job collecting signatures to get that competing initiative on the ballot. but vote no on this, vote yes on this. It becomes very hard, and so in the end, the one that the billionaires were pushing is the one that passed. That kind of gave, I think, both Bob Ferguson and the Democrats in general and the billionaires that support gun control and the Democrats, it kind of oriented them around, hey, maybe we can actually destroy the freedoms of Washingtonians and Americans in general a lot faster. That's what they're seeing in Colorado. You're seeing it in Illinois. You're seeing it in other states as well. California, of course, all these states where crime is escalating and it's getting worse, and they just want to make sure you can't defend yourself from it. So that's been kind of the Democrats' priority on this whole thing. And the billionaires have methodically kind of kept going. When 1639, which was the gun to basic, or the initiative to try to restrict firearms, semi-automatic firearms, when that bill or the initiative was proposed, funded by Bloomberg, Paul Allen, Bill Gates, Nick Hanauer, all the billionaires in our state, of course, and out of state. I challenged the ballot title, had a ballot title challenge there and delayed the launch of it. Probably cost them quite a bit of money. Insiders told me it cost them a couple $1 million because of that ballot title challenge and how long it delayed, and the fact that it screwed up. They botched it and put the wrong information on the back of the initiative. There's all kinds of other problems that happened with that. But at that point in time, right, the Democrats were so committed they've decided to jump in whole hog, right, and just try to take away your freedoms. And being successful in that initiative, which was almost exclusively funded by billionaires, that initiative was really, I think, what really triggered, in particular, kind of the relentless kind of assault that you have now. Plus, Republicans lost some seats in the House and the Senate. As long as the Republicans had either a very narrow minority or they held the majority in the Senate, there were no firearms restriction bills that went through at that time. So, the Denver Post article, Jason, that you're referencing there, really just illustrates what I think the Democrats were so eager and excited about all along, is that suddenly they feel like this is their chance. So they're kind of plunging ahead and seeing what kind of restrictions they can get. We've seen this before. This has happened in the past. I experienced it in the late 90s. Late 80s when I was younger. And I remember when Reagan signed the assault weapons ban after the Stockton, California school shooting event. And so that was really the drive and the push for them that time. And the Brady bill that kind of came in after that. But it ended up, they thought they had momentum with that stuff, and it ended up actually backfiring on them substantially. Part of it's the crime wave, just like it is now. It's easy to be kind of this limousine liberal type person who basically lives in a bubble, as most well-paid kind of elitist leftists sort of are. And you can insulate yourself from crime pretty easily. You live in gated communities. Pramila Jayapal lives she's the Democrat congresswoman out of Seattle. She lives in a gated community, right? She never has to worry about crime. She's got armed security guards that probably patrol it. She's protected from the results of the legislation that they would pass to make it easier for criminals to go out there and prey on citizens. She has armed security herself, right? She doesn't have to worry about that stuff. There's plenty of Democrats that fit in that category. Nick Hanauer, Bill Gates, right? These guys aren't going to have to worry about crime. It doesn't affect them personally. They have armed security. They're able to avoid that. However, eventually the crime becomes pervasive, and it starts to hit a lot of people that were mindlessly supporting dumb policies like that, and they're suddenly realizing that, wow, these laws that we thought were such a good idea, they aren't so good anymore, and maybe we don't want crime to come and impact our lives. That's kind of inevitably the blowback that I think we're experiencing right now. Nevertheless, they always get eager and excited, like the Denver Post article wrote about it. Now they're excited about this, and then we'll see how many Democrats survive this process when it comes to electorally. Rarely does a Democrat just push gun control and not any other stupid thing, right? They push a lot of stupid ideas at once usually, so it's hard to know which ones will make it through. And Jason, related to that, you kind of asked a question about which bills will pass or that have made the cutoff date are going to pass. And I have not spent a lot of time going over that lately, so I'm a little bit unprepared to go through all of those bills. But we'll see. Frank, you got a question there, Frank Flores. Do you think the car tab legislation will ever catch wind again, or I'm assuming get wind in its sails again is what you're asking about. And I do think it will. I think that it's mostly a symbol more than it is an actual cost that people are so focused on. The one thing to remember is that the car tabs, or making it $30 car tabs again, right? You kind of have to go back to what it was like paying car tabs in the 80s and 90s. And Washington State had just like this ridiculously inflated cost of car tabs. So I remember buying, I had a really cheap truck that I had at the time in high school. And I remember paying like $260 or something like that for car tabs on this dumb little stupid cheap truck that had massive amount of miles on it, and it was the most expensive thing, especially back then, other than some mechanical breakdown I might have associated with that vehicle, was the stupid car tabs. And I didn't know any better because I was a high school student. So I remember at one point not paying my car tabs so I could save up enough money. I was going on a running trip, and the ticket, like I was trying to save money to go to China because I was on a running team going to China. And I willfully didn't pay my car tabs, figuring that even if I got a ticket, it was less money than the car tab payment was going to be, and I would still save money so that I could have it in China to spend that I've been saving from my dishwashing job at the time. And so sure enough, I got pulled over. I got a ticket. It was right near my house, of course, and the ticket was so small back then in comparison to the car tab price that it was just. I cost of doing business, right? I just paid the ticket, and that saved me that extra $150 that I could use on my trip. So that was a big deal to me at the time. I still remember that. When Tim Eyman came around and found how angry people were about car tabs, and ran the $30 car tab bill, which I don't remember the name of the number of that initiative anymore. If he was here, he'd have it memorized. But when I remember him running that, I thought that was a great and brilliant idea. I didn't know Tim at the time at all, but of course I voted for it like everyone I knew did. And the $30 car tabs passed. And then, of course, it was attacked by all the grifters and government people that grift off of these stupid fees. And even though the court at that time threw it out, the legislature stepped in, and the governor, Gary Locke at the time, stepped in and said, listen, we're still going to make this law. And they did. And it lasted that way for a long time. But of course, then it gets worn down, and they take away, everybody wants the bureaucrats and all these little grifting groups that survive around them. They want more money, so they found more ways to get it up there. Right? He ran it again. It passed again. So they dropped the cost of tabs down again, and then of course it started to come back up again. Tim Eyman ran again a few years ago. It was the last initiative that he did, even while the Attorney General was persecuting him through the lawsuit, the 12-year litigation now that Bob Ferguson had been after Tim Eyman for. At the time, it was the last initiative, and it passed again. And this time, it went to the courts, and again, the courts decided to throw it out. This is kind of it's obviously very popular. Remember, they spent $5 million trying to defeat that car tab initiative at the ballot box, and they failed. And it's become more a symbol of the fact that the people have clearly spoken time and time and time again. Every single time it gets put before them that they don't want to pay ridiculous, overinflated, fake car tab fees for nothing. And that's all they get. They get nothing for paying a lot. And so people have spoken on this many times. And the last thing any bureaucrat or Democrat wants to do is listen to somebody who actually, what the voters have to say, if it has to do with reducing how much money they take from the voters. There's no tax I've ever met that the Democrats don't seem to love. And the bureaucrats like it because that's their way of perpetuating themselves. The nature of bureaucracy is to perpetuate itself. They want the cash, so they need to collect it. And I think that at some point in time it'll come back around. Not so much because it's the highest priority for people to cut anymore, but more because it's a symbol of the abuse of government and their refusal to listen to what people actually say. So because of that, I think it stands out as an initiative idea, and certainly a policy idea that could come back again before too long. Yes. So sorry, I'm going back here to the questions, and is this what you're talking about? I don't know where that came from. So let's see, Dayton, Washington. Good to see you. Dayton is not a big town, so it's always interesting. Somebody from Utah watching. So thank you, Heidi. It's good to have somebody watching from Utah. Jason, again, just coming back here, do you know anything about why there are a bunch of apartments being built in Clark County? Most of them have been empty for a while. Well, I don't specifically on the apartments that you're talking about, probably, but I'm going to tell you that there's I'm generally not a big fan of high-density housing construction for a variety of reasons when it comes to the community. I generally don't support it if the alternative choice is to either build businesses where your jobs are produced or to build neighborhoods, right, individual homes. If you've ever spent any time doorbelling in apartment complexes, and I have in many, many places around the state, and you talk to hundreds and eventually thousands of people who live there, and of course I've had family members living there. I've lived in an apartment back when I was in my early 20s, and nobody's living there saying, I'm living the dream. This is it, man. I'm right where I want to be, and I don't want to change. Everybody's there as a transition. They're either, that's kind of their first step. They're moving up in the world. They're in that apartment for a while. They're saving money, or or they're getting married, or there's something's happening where they're making a life transition, and this is kind of the step along the path. For me, I lived in one because I remodeled my way out of a free place I was staying in, and I finally had to break down and get a place, I remember, in Bellingham. And it was clearly transitionary, right? I was going to be there for a little while until I found a little bit better housing arrangement later on. So people always do that. That's how they're living there. And they want it to be clean and safe and not have any problems, but eventually they're hoping to move out. Or they've had some setback in their life and they're there, right? They've got divorced, or they just moved, or they lost a job, or something happened, and so they're living in an apartment as temporary housing. So the challenge you have in the community is if you put too much high-density housing in one area, you tend to have a lot of people there who are then transitioning through. And so they're still using the services in the community, but they're not necessarily attached to that community solidly yet. Now, some people end up living in apartment complexes for a long time, but that's not typically the people that move there. Usually they're there for a little while and they move on. Most people that I know have lived in apartment complexes, whether that's because they fell back or they're moving up in life, that's kind of, they don't live there very long. They live there for a while, and then they save up money to move somewhere else, so they try to move to a different place. Some of the exceptions to that are always if you get this little quaint, small complex near a park, or there's something about that they like. Sometimes people will decide that's where they want to live, but most of the time these big high-rise, one-size-fits-all, they all look the same, and there's 10,000 people living in the series of these things. It has a big impact in the community. It does change the way people view their relationship to their community, and so it's I don't think encouraging mass volume of these this type of construction is optimal for a community. And I don't know what, especially if they're sitting there empty in a community like you described, Jason, in Clark County. If they're sitting there empty, I'm not sure why you'd be encouraging or having more, and that's where we're at. So don't have an answer. Sorry, totally went off on a tangent there. I did not know it was possible to Cristiano. I did not know it was possible to marry someone under 18 years old. Do you have more info on this, and why is it still legal? Okay, well, it does depend on what state you're in, so that's going to change the answer to that question. It is possible to marry somebody under 18. I think even in Washington, I think you can, but it requires parental approval, and there has, so there has to be some reason that you would agree to it, but there's other states where I think it's as young as 16, if I remember right, in a couple of other states. I don't remember which states those are right now, but I know I was reading a story about this a little while ago. So it is possible, but usually it requires like a parental approval. It's just like you don't join the military until you're 18, but with parental approval, you can join the military when you're 17, for example. Or there's other exceptions to the rule that exists out there, but it usually requires a little bit more involvement. Now, I'm assuming that the reason this came up as a question was in a negative context about why the heck would anybody want to get married at that young that age, and why would we want to allow it? But it honestly goes back to at least probably the origins of that would be more cultural. It was more common in previous generations to get married younger, not so much now. So anyway, I don't know that I really addressed that really well, but that's my answer to that question, Cristiano. Jason, you got a question here. What bills would a Governor Bob Ferguson pursue for 2025 legislative session? Well, that's a good question. I mean, really, let's hope that we don't have a Governor Bob Ferguson, but if we had the trials and tribulations that a Governor Ferguson term would give us, it's likely there's several things. He's a Democrat, so he's going to push for policies that increase taxes, bloat the size of government, increase crime, and make it harder to live in Washington State. And then probably related to that would be things that reward his political allies, whoever helped him get into office. So those are pretty much, you can generically fit almost every Democrat bill into one of those categories. They're rinse, wash, repeat. They're the same, been the same for decades. It's essentially going to be the policy they pursue. But Ferguson is one part of that equation. It isn't clear to me that he has this even the same kind of clout that somebody like Inslee seems to have had within the Democrat Party. And I don't know if that's because of fundraising purposes or why, but I'm not sure Ferguson has that kind of support. Ferguson does seem to have created a lot of enemies within the Democrat Party. I've noticed there's a lot of Democrats that hate Ferguson, like they genuinely hate him and despise him. It doesn't mean they aren't going to still vote for him, but it does mean that at least within the political establishment that we have within Washington State, there's a bunch of people that don't like him. I don't know what he's done to necessarily create that level of animosity within his own party, but it exists, and it's surprising to me to see what people will say about him in a negative context within the Democrat Party. So it could be that he has very little tails to bills, and that essentially what you'll have is the legislature, if the Democrats are still majority control, kind of running their own thing, and maybe there's some fighting between them. The funny thing is, when Ferguson was on the King County Council years ago, he used to be viewed as a mellow, less extreme council member at the time. So he had this reputation of being kind of a moderate. Obviously, that's all gone now. But the truth is, Ferguson probably just has no political viewpoints or center at all. The guy's most likely just, kind of psychopathic. He's mainly focused, narcissist, right? He's focused on his own promotion and whatever he has to do. If he has to be a hardcore fire-breathing leftist today to get elected, that's what he'll be. If he has to change and be something else, that's what he'll be. Anything to promote Ferguson, my guess is that's pretty much going to be how he operates, and that's a fairly predictable way of looking at how he's going to operate. Mike, you got a question here about is there ever going to be any accountability with regard to the $600 million lost from our state's employment security? Big fan, and thank you. The answer to that is probably no. I don't see there's going to be any accountability. Government doesn't actually want to find out what happened to that for real, especially if some of that money ended up getting recirculated back into the hopper in terms of campaign contributions. Remember, the whole way that this thing happened, the whole way they were able to basically take this money was an internal employee at the Employment Security Department turned off the security features and then allowed the money just to flow out like water. It's like breaking the dam on the Columbia, right? It just started flowing. And it actually took federal intervention at the time to actually stop the state from dumping the volume of cash they were into who knows where. And they lost $600 million. They would have lost closer to $1 billion, but there was enough money in transit they could still kind of get out of the banking system before it went to wherever it was going to go. The feds don't care. They're not going to look. The state doesn't care. They're not going to look. Not that far. If you read the state auditor's report on it, it was this massive tome of a report, but there's no clarity as to where that money went. Nobody really wants to look at it. if they really did care, they could get to it, right? But really, they rapidly became more concerned about grandma spending 18 seconds too long in the federal capitol, taking selfies. That's a really high priority for the federal government, and of course, the state level, where some of that money might have been fed back into some of those politicians. We'll never know. They don't want to look too closely either. Maybe they don't want to really know how that works. It's like if you know too much about how the sausage, and imagine most of these people are probably tied in the Democrat Party anyway. They don't really want to look at where that money went. So I don't expect there to be much of any accountability there at all. If we ever had any, I'd be incredibly impressed. Lori, thank you for checking in from Buckley. I love Buckley. And Karen, you're asking, why is the AGO and WSRP AGO and endorsed and approved Democrat Reichert? His voting record proves that. When you say Attorney General, I'm assuming, Karen, you're talking about AGO, Attorney General, is who you're talking about? And WSRP endorsing a proven Democrat record. Well, and the Washington State Republican Party is not endorsing a candidate at this point in time. But remember, their April convention, they will. So here's some of the, and this always comes up. Okay, so we pick our candidates oftentimes in the primary, and there's a kaleidoscope of candidates you can choose from, or two or more, and you pick the one you like. In this case, you have Reichert running, and you have Semi Bird running. Those are the two Republicans that are known out there. And so there's always animosity between the two sides, two camps, fans of each side. And there's animosity at the other one, or the people who are supporting the other ones. And I caution people to not get too emotional about some of these endorsements because, especially in a primary, it gets sorted out by next August, right, as to who's going to actually be on the ballot in the general. Obviously, they want it to be as clean as possible with only one option. But we have a top two primary system, and so a party can't really prevent the fact that you're going to have multiple people on the ballot at the same time. So there's nothing the party can do to stop that. However, unique in modern Washington history anyway, the April convention for the Republican Party is attempting to influence and change this equation a little bit for the top two primary. The way they're doing that is the whole point in having the convention when they schedule it, which is in April, is to schedule it a few weeks before the May filing deadline. So even though both these candidates for governor, Reichert and Byrd, have filed and are running for governor, and they filed Byrd filed really early, year and a half ago, I think now. Reichert filed maybe 6 months ago, something like that. Anyway, so both these guys are running their campaigns. So what the state party is going to do with Republican PCOs or representatives in the various counties that are there, and there'll be thousands of them at the state convention in Spokane, where, the Republican state convention in April, those the state party's officially endorsing before the primary one of the Republican candidates and the one that the party's going to get behind. Now that's a big deal, only because it means that the party theoretically can only spend resources on an endorsed candidate. Now, they may not have a lot of resources, but they certainly have communication resources. They have the ability to spend campaign funds that come to them, and parties have more flexibility with how much money they can spend on candidates than PACs or individuals. So there's some benefit in the party endorsing your campaign that's pretty tangible. And so the theory and the reason why they're doing this is because historically Republicans are super amazing at self-immolation when it comes to elections, because everybody has a vision from Jesus and God, and they're certain that they're the one that should run for that office, right? And so you'll get a whole bunch of them flood the zone. And what happens in a top two primary system is if you have too many Republicans that have name recognition or similar abilities, they'll cancel each other out in the primary, and then that's how you get two Democrats on the ballot, which has happened in the 10th Congressional District. It's happened in the Lieutenant Governor race, happened in the county or the state auditor race. It's happened in the 47th Ledge District race, right? It happened a number of times. The Democrats have had it happen to them. They had it happen in the 2012 state treasurer race, and that's how you had Dwayne Davidson become a first Republican treasurer since shortly after World War II. However, one of the reasons the Republicans had this happen enough, and they decided, listen, we're going to see if we can make it some kind of influence and have at least one of our people get through when we have a flood the zone sort of situation. So they're using the April convention to endorse statewide office holders, and they're using it to endorse congressional seats. That's it. So you got up to 10 potential seats that they'll be endorsing for in Congress. And then you've got I think 7 seats here they'll be endorsing for statewide office. And it kind of matters because this year you've got a number of open state seats in Washington state that aren't held by an incumbent. The governor's race is obvious because Inslee's stepping away. The attorney general's race is obvious because Ferguson's running for governor, so the attorney general's seat is vacant. You have, or at least vacant from having an incumbent. You have Mike Kreidler, who's fossilized into office for way too long as the insurance commissioner, and somebody decided they were just going to stop propping up his dementia there and just let him go, and so he's stepping out. So that's an open seat, although I don't know if any Republicans have officially declared for that seat. And you also have the public lands commissioner race or position, which was vacated when Hillary Franz ran her short-lived campaign for governor, squandered all that cash, and then decided to now jump into running for Congress, if I remember right. Yeah, she's running for Congress out there. Anyway, Hillary Franz squandering money right and left, but because of that, you have these seats that are vacated. And so you don't normally have that many statewide office seats that don't have an incumbent in them. So that's why you're seeing a little bit more flood the zone in a couple of the races here. This cycle so far, Republicans only have 2 active Republicans who have raised any money to run any kind of campaign at all running for governor. And so one of them's Semi Bird, one of them's Reichert. A lot of people, and this is just rational, this is not a conspiracy, people will support somebody that they know or they're familiar with a little bit more than they're going to support somebody who they aren't. And so you're going to have some people who have endorsed Reichert who are going to be more clearly associated with either historic Washington State Republican Party politics, or maybe they're currently sitting on the board. But the state Republican Party doesn't officially endorse anybody until the April meeting, and that is unique. That is unique to this year. Theoretically, it's going to be moving forward. When I talked to Representative Walsh about this a while ago, the truth is either Byrd or Reichert could get the state party endorsement of the PCOs, the people that are there. But again, it's going to depend on the campaigns, both respective campaigns, pushing and working for getting the PCOs and the Republicans that are at the state convention to go with them versus the other guy. Same thing, by the way, is going to happen. OSPI director in particular, because Office Superintendent of Public Instruction, because you have a whole bunch of Republicans that are running that race. So the endorsement there is probably going to matter. To a lesser extent, superintendent or public lands commissioner, because you have at least 2 Republicans that are running in that race, Jamie Herrera Butler and Sue Peterson. So those 2 people are going to be duking it out. In fact, the only race so far that the Republican Party endorsement at the April convention may not have too much of an impact on, it's going to be the Attorney General's race, because you really only seem to have, there's Pete Serrano with the Silent Majority Foundation, who's been doing a lot of litigation against Inslee and Ferguson and the state for a while now, and a lot of different issues related to COVID, gun rights, a bunch of other issues. A good guy seems to be the only guy in the race. So that's an interesting thing. That'll be, in his case, it'll be probably the least surprise that the state Republican Party would most likely endorse him. Maybe a Republican comes out of the woodwork in the meantime. But generally, nobody's endorsed him. Avoid attacking people just because they endorse the other person. You can always try to convince them otherwise. I have not endorsed in the governor's race. I did interview Semi Bird here on our channel, and I've offered to also interview Reichert. I'm actually anticipating seeing Reichert when I'm up in the San Juan County Republican Party convention this weekend, this Saturday, I anticipate. But I have offered to interview him in the past because if I'm going to interview one Republican while they're in the primary, I'll usually try to interview the others. His consultant said yes, but we just haven't scheduled the time yet. And at the end of the day, sure, you may not like Reichert's voting record in Congress. I disagree with the voting record. Many things he voted on as well. But trying to compare him to Ferguson is going to be a stretch. And trying to say that he's as bad as Ferguson is really not honest at all. So we'll see whether it's Byrd or Ferguson that gets endorsed in the state party, and that's going to have an impact, I think. Jason, you got a question here about will there be any more crazy rulings for the Seattle Supreme Court this year? I actually don't know the Supreme Court schedule very much right now. There are some cases that have been appealed up there, and as I just mentioned, Pete Serrano might be a really good person to talk to about that. So I'm not familiar with any that are coming up. But good question. Always worth watching and worth putting the pressure on them. Let's see. Sir Gilby got a question here. Did you hear about this one, Glen? Washington State diverted $340 million in federal COVID funds to migrants, more specifically illegal immigrants, via $1,000 checks. Ridiculous. So, Sir Gilby, I did, and let me explain that a little bit more. It's actually worse than you're representing there. And this came out originally because Jason Rantz at KTTH 770 AM, right? And you see him on Fox News sometimes, but Jason Rantz done a good job. Yeoman's work on this one. He exposed this originally, but if you actually read the article that came out a couple days ago, it's actually closer to $460 million. Actually, probably if we look into it, you'll find out it's worth that there's even more. So however much it is, but it's a lot. And so and it was more than $1,000. Like some of them were $3,000 checks. And yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, the video that I just did, I filmed earlier today, is related to this issue. And it's just another example of how your tax dollars, when given to the government, are rarely spent where they claim they're going to be spent. We're lied to in almost all cases, at least with some percentage of the money that we give to the state and or the feds. In this case, it's federal money kicked down to us, which is mostly borrowed money, so it's probably Chinese money originally, and it just gets squandered on this stuff, and it's ridiculous. Aardvark, spleen, great important question there, super important question. Let's talk mac and cheese, Kraft or Velveeta. I'm probably a Kraft fan in that case, and lived on mac and cheese quite often when I was in college, and even out of college. I always liked mac and cheese, even before I had kids. When I made a lot of different types of mac and cheese for them, what parent doesn't? It's a relatively easy meal, and kids do seem to like it. Nate's memes. Hi, Glenn. Have you heard they want to stop monitoring sex offenders in Washington? Yes, and I've done a number of videos on this in the past. And there doesn't seem to be any higher priority for most of the Washington State Democrats, particularly Bob Ferguson and especially Governor Inslee, on making sure that they get those violent sex predators off of McNeil Island as soon as they can, dump them in your neighborhood, don't warn you ahead of time, and we'll let you know. That seems to be their priority. Now, they're fighting against the 1990 Community Protection Act, which citizens like you and I were angry about and got it passed back in the day. And I guess the Democrats have decided they want to have another massive crime wave that'll generate a lot higher volume of very angry people that'll eventually push back and change that structure. Wow, this is an interesting question, and I don't get too many on this one. Best and worst case scenario, Glenn. Actually, before I get to that one, sorry, I'm moving up before this. Pamela, I was involved before Tim Eyman. I testified to encourage the Blue Book instead of them valuing vehicles at 100% for the first 2 years. Pam Roach asked me who I was, former Department of Revenue. Well, Pamela, thank you for doing that back then. And obviously you probably started something. So before Tim Eyman even got involved, your involvement here probably drew more attention to it than it would have had otherwise. So thank you so much for doing that. Jason got a question here. Any news on Sideshow Bob's campaign? What is he running on? Is he just relying on that he has a ton of money compared to the Republicans? That's a good question. I do believe Bob Ferguson counts on, number one, having the most amount of money. Number two, essentially being the only Democrat in the race. Now, it's not true. Mark Mullet's another Democrat that's still in the race and has raised a bunch of money, at least compared, not as. So essentially, you have, Bob Ferguson, number one, Dave Reichert's raised the second most, Mark Mullet's raised the third most, and Semi Bird has raised the fourth most. I didn't look at the PDC before I went live here. So, things can change around, and I haven't looked just recently to see on the fundraising numbers, but I believe it stays about the same. Mark Mullet, though, is a relatively conservative by Democrat standards state senator out of the 5th Ledge District out of Issaquah, and he's going to be. The Democrat Party's decided to destroy him anyway. So him running against Ferguson Ferguson just will paint him as a Republican and probably not even worry too much about the primary. I think that's Ferguson's plan right now, is to ignore the primary, focus on the general, and just motivate all of the, he'll just figure out who he needs to get to come out and fund or to support his campaign. I don't see him doing any massive fundraising more than what he's done already. So Ferguson, I think, is just counting on being able to coast with the Democrats. He does have a history of campaigning more seriously than Inslee. I don't know that that's necessarily more serious than Gregoire did, but he has some level of that. The one thing is, though, that Ferguson doesn't come across great. He's not comfortable with the public as much as I think a good politician would need to be. And he brings his own baggage with him, right? So we'll just have to see. But that's he's just been raising money, and other than the tuna chicken checks that he sent out to help bribe people, you haven't really seen him do much. Now, remember, during the legislative session, I forgot to mention this, when you're an incumbent, either the legislature or in one of these state positions, during the legislative session, which still we have another month or so to go on that, they can't campaign. It's illegal for them to campaign at all, or even fundraise. And so you're going to see that suddenly after a session, that's when things change. That's when their media buys come out. That's when they start doing political campaigning. You're not going to see much, though, during session. So, Jack, you got a question here. And by the way, Mike, South Bend, Washington, thank you for logging in and watching. Jack, you got a question here. Best and worst case scenario for the country in the next 365 days. Well, okay, you got a lot of options, right? Best and worst case scenario. So best case scenario, the people wake up pretty substantially, not just in our state, but around the country, and they do an amazing job getting good people elected to office. We don't get into a major world war. We don't have a major terrorist incident, and somehow we don't have a complete collapse of we don't have a major economic downturn. That's the best outcome. If you got a bunch of people who are actually have spines and they're willing to come in, whether that be federally or at a state level, and people start to get seriously busy about downsizing government and shrinking the size of government, that'd be the best case. It's February, so that'd be by now you would know if there was any level of seriousness associated with it next year. That'd be exciting. The worst case scenario is involving you basically three things. Three things that if it is to happen in the next year, your life will forever be measured by what it was like before these things are happening and what it's like afterwards. One is war, right? I'm terribly concerned about our country deciding to jump and flounder its way into some kind of horrible world war or much more aggressive war than the many wars that were involved in at a smaller, lower level scale around the world. And if we got involved in a war that involved a great power of some kind like that, then things change dramatically. And again, there's no good outcome, I think, in that type of case. So that's that's probably my absolute worst case. Second worst case, it's kind of related to that, is let's just say we maybe don't quite go to war, but we're clearly dealing with some issues in a great power type conflict, and one of these foreign actors decides to use some of the millions of people that we've allowed to come across the border with no documentation or tracking at all, non-U.S. citizens, but a few of them were sent up here for insurance policy by, it could be any country really, but China, India, North Korea, it doesn't matter. Just pick your poison. So, and they're here and they have some level of skills and motivation, and they decide, let's take down the power grid. something, unfortunately, that our country is completely unserious about protecting, and it's very vulnerable. And if they took down our power grid for a year or so, the world changes again. I don't buy into the statistics that 90% of America dies off if the power grid goes down for a year. But because I think people are more resilient and they find ways of surviving. I mean, I think people will generally find solutions much more innovatively than people can figure out in computer projections, but it will be terrible. And if you think about it, most people don't really know how to live with no power for several months, let alone a year. And there's a lot of supply chain problems. If you thought the supply chain problems that we had a few years ago were bad, those would be a dream come true compared to what would come in that kind of a case. And then sort of related to that, the third thing I would say is a complete collapse in the value of the currency. If you look at the actual overall federal debt, there's trillions and trillions of the existing debt that's going to have to be refinanced this year. Much of that debt was acquired when interest rates were incredibly low. So when they go to refinance it, and they'll probably be able to refinance it, but they're rapidly increasing the cost of interest on the debt every month right now with this refinancing of all this debt. Plus, we're still losing $1.5 billion a year. The debt's escalating out of control, and you're changing the nature of what you're paying for. And so I believe it's this year, before the end of this year, the interest payments on the debt are going to exceed the military expenditures. Now, if I'm wrong on it being this year, I'm not too far wrong, so it's maybe next year. But there is such a thing as math, even though most Democrats deny it exists, or they say it's racist. So even though they may say that, it doesn't change the fact that it's real, and the debt's real, and the interest payments are real, and that has a significant ability to impact the value of the currency. And if you see inflation kick up again, where the dollar really takes a huge nosedive, or there's something pretty significant related to that, maybe combined with an oil shock, I don't know, something like that, you suddenly have financial impacts that are ripple throughout the society, and it's really a difficult world to live in at that time. And so those are my scenarios. Jack, thank you for asking them. On those happy thoughts, I'd prefer something good, not the bad, to happen. Gold and Crisp. How likely do you think the state of Washington could go back to in-person voting and get rid of mail-in voting? Okay, the likelihood on that, I've talked about this before periodically. Number one, it could happen just because of some other federal laws. Remember, there's a lot of the lawsuits about mail-in voting that are going on all over the country. Don't have anything directly to do with Washington, but it's very possible you could have a federal ruling at some point that greatly changes how we do mail-in voting in our state. That's number one. Number two, you could have a bigger scandal, more of them that start to pop up just about the lack of chain of custody and the complete problems with the voter enroll system that we have here, especially if a Republican won. Suddenly, the Democrats might rediscover electing integrity as a priority. But right now, the last time I saw any surveys on the subject, people like mail-in voting. They do. They don't necessarily understand all the problems with it. Fewer people like it today than they did a few years ago. That's true, especially Republicans, and that's true too. But most people like the convenience of mail-in voting. And if you just talk to people that aren't tied into the political process and kind of tracking these things every day, most of them like it. They don't realize that there's millions of ballots that are just distributed like confetti throughout the state. They don't realize how easy it is to commit fraud with mail-in voting and how nobody's looking or wants to catch it anyway. So they don't understand the problems with the voter rolls. There's all these other issues that most people don't probably understand. So because of that, it's still popular. So there's momentum of that popularity that even though it's decreasing, I think it's less popular now than it used to be, it's still so popular that I don't see any easy way to get rid of it until either there's an expose in some way that's irrefutable, or until there's a decision that's coming out of one of these other court cases in other states to make that change. I would still advocate for that change, and I would like to work towards that, but that's going to take a little while ago. please tell me. Apple official, you're asking me my name. So Glen Morgan with We the Govern. Hopefully that's obvious, but you can look at my YouTube channel for more information, or go to We the Govern on my website, and I have a whole bio right there. Can we circulate a petition to send, this is a question from Nate's, can we circulate a petition to send Ferguson and Inslee on the mission to colonize Mars so they can start the first Chaz district? Love that. I think that'd be great. You can certainly turn in any kind of petition you want. Wouldn't be a legally binding one, but it could be fun. Paul, question. Do you know of a website where I can find local crime statistics? Some people are still not convinced that crime rates are increasing. Well, Paul, it depends on where you live. The answer to that is, my short answer is no. My longer answer to that is that, listen, if you want to actually make an impact in your community right now and you don't know what to do, start reporting on crime statistics locally. Don't use Facebook as a or Nextdoor. Once that stuff gets reported there too well or too effectively, they'll shut your site down, take it away from you. Set up a website that reports crime stats, and you can get them all from your local police departments. A good place to start, and then it rolls in from there. Good question, though, and I like the fact that somebody asked that, because it's kind of an important thing in our community, especially now. Let's see. Golden Crisp question. How likely would Washington get in-person ballots rather than mail-in? I already addressed that one earlier, so I won't repeat my answer on that one. Jason, what bills you think will pass this session? Failed to answer that question earlier, Jason, and I'm going to fail again because I need to sit back and kind of look at the current drama and the way it's laid out, and I haven't done that this weekend. I was more concerned about my dead car, dead computer, and dead washing machine at home, if you didn't watch the first part of the video. And so I just got caught up more in that than doing some of that research. Zay, you got a question here. In your opinion, is Bob just as bad as California Governor Gavin Newsom? I don't know if he's just as bad, but he's certainly, and he's probably not as connected or probably as smart, but he's about equal on the sliminess scale. And so the slime scale is always a worthwhile one to have when it comes to politicians, and Newsom is definitely on that slimy scale, and I would say Ferguson jumps right in there with him. Golden Crisp, you're asking about Soros money, and I'm not sure what that question is specifically related to, but Soros is involved in Washington, although usually more on the Attorney General, Prosecutor, and Secretary of State front when we've tracked some of his money around. Let's see, Curtis Bartle, what do you think about Mick Rogers? In my opinion, a rhino. I'm sure that's what you mean there. Well, I mean, here's the deal, right? If you're a conservative, probably everybody seems like a rhino to you. Republican in name only is what that stands for. And I've done a video once on this. I don't get a lot of value out of calling. I mean, listen, I'm a conservative guy, libertarian guy. You can watch plenty of my content, know my background. It's not a secret, and but I'm not in public office right now, right? So if I was in public office right now, no matter how conservative I am, I'm going to make decisions, most likely, that would convince some people that I'm an extreme, crazy conservative. They would convince other people that I'm too libertarian, probably convince other people that I'm not, that I'm a rhino, right, as well. And I'd caution you a little bit about doing this. And I understand that impression and that desire to do that. I've done the same myself. When I was a college Republican, I remember at Columbia, New York City, I brought Giuliani to campus, who I thought was way too liberal, didn't like him, and I didn't like two of his policies. I didn't like his approach to rent control, which I thought was ignorant, and I didn't like his approach to guns in general. He was hostile to the Second Amendment, or at least he wasn't favorable enough, and I was a big pro-gun guy, and so I would never support a politician of either party who I didn't believe was in favor of the Second Amendment. And that being said, calling him, which we wouldn't have used the term rhino back then. I think I used the term squishy. It was the term we oftentimes use then. Ineffective and highly useless in that case. My policy differences with him are very clear. In my mind, I know what they were, and he probably didn't care. I did bring him to Columbia. I met him a number of times, but I didn't, that was my opinion of him. But nevertheless, for his place and time, when Giuliani got elected to mayor of New York City, which is a miracle in itself, where most people were not Republicans, there's no doubt that guy changed the city in his prime, in his heyday, when he was at the top of his game, he changed that city completely in a very good way. I believe that there are tens of thousands of people alive today because that guy was elected mayor. If you looked at the murder rate drop, it was the largest drop in murder that's ever happened in American history or any modern history that I'm aware of for a major city. Directly attributable to the policies that he personally pushed against all odds and fought and got through. But many people would call him a rhino. And they probably would have called him the equivalent to that at the time. I was around people that did that. So, the question is, you keep a politician in office until you have a much better option to replace them, who's going to push the liberty and freedom agenda or whatever agenda it is that you're trying to hopefully get through. And that's the nature of politics, right? I don't believe in attaching salvation to the political process in the sense of personal to politicians. It's an imperfect process that we use right now to get the policies that we choose that we want. It's not perfect. McMorris Rodgers probably takes votes that I would disagree with. Other times she takes votes that I agree with. I've actually seen her come around on a couple of ideas that she's had in the past, a line that I would agree with her on some of these issues. But I'm not in Washington, D.C., and I don't know the pressure that she's under. I think, if I lived there at this point in time right now, I'd vote for her. I don't live in that district, but so again, calling everybody a rhino is probably not your optimal path to making a difference where you live. Jason, you're asking a question about, in your opinion, would it be legal to build an AR with a fixed magazine? I'm looking for FFLs who would transfer a fixed magazine lower. Great question. I don't know on this one, and the challenge you always have if you answer a question or my gut tells me it probably would be, but you're dealing with people who don't necessarily interpret the law the same way it's written, or just come up with something they make up. So I don't know that I'd want to throw my future potential. I don't know that I'd want to put it in their hands. Let's just say that. Stephanie, you got a question here, Stephanie Lauer, about does anyone know if illegal border crossers have been trafficked here? Oh, yeah, sure they have. Yeah, by thousands of them. I don't know how many, but thousands. No doubt. So if you talk to anybody in law enforcement, they can tell you. Go to SeaTac, go to Tukwila, go to Berrien, go to Seattle, go to Yakima. You're going to find plenty of examples, unfortunately. Average Geek Joe, do you ever watch MSNBC? Just curious. Sometimes, not very often. I don't have a lot of time to waste, but occasionally there's clips that are worth reviewing, and it's helpful just to know what they're thinking about. The Reaper Son, yes, you're making a quote there, Stalin quote, not about who votes, it's about who counts the votes. One of his more famous quotes. Let's see. Aloha, Mom. Thanks for answering, Stephanie, there. That's true. I-5 corridor, nation's #1 transportation route for human trafficking. And it does go all the way up into Canada, but it diverts, to different places. So, as well. Mike, you're mentioning Survival 3 is probably based on my worst case scenario that I had earlier. 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water. What are we seeing when looking at our communities? And I'm assuming that you make the point there, and listen, this is going to be a different scenario. I live rurally. People who live rurally are going to be more usually a little bit more independent as far as how you set up your living arrangements. Maybe you have animals. Maybe you're more used to having firearms and protecting your animals. Maybe you're more used to having a secure environment in general. You have the ability and understand and know what it means to grow food for yourself or harvest food from the land. If you did have a really bad scenario where a lot of people are harvesting food from the land, you're not going to probably get much out of that very quickly. But, the big problem is if you live in a city and one of these really bad situations happens. I generally would advocate to people that get as rural as you can comfortably get with some land of yourself, and then get to know the people around you. You will not be an island. You're going to be with those other people. So it's important for you to do that. Let's see. Chris, Glen, what's preventing me from making a citizen's arrest and ejecting the illegals myself? Well, I'm pretty sure you won't do too well if you try to do that. Chris, certainly wouldn't recommend it. In fact, I'd strongly discourage it. And mostly it's because exactly how the heck are you going to make a citizen's arrest without illegally detaining somebody? And it would be considered illegally detaining somebody if you somehow lock them up and then somehow drive them to California or Texas. Not a good plan. I can't see how that works well at all. So that's my opinion. Deanne Sanderson question: do you think it's advisable for conservatives in Washington to vote for RFK Jr. to take away from Biden? And the answer there is no. Vote for who you want there. Let the other side divide themselves up, but it doesn't make any sense to divide ourselves up, especially on that vote. I don't see how that makes any sense at all. Semi-country living at We the Govern. Who do we contact about all the pollution on our roads? Just came back from Michigan, and they have less trash on major highways and on and off ramps here. Washington State looks like a disaster. Sure, that's partly because Washington State decided to stick homeless camps all over the freeway, and because of that, the garbage just piles up at an astronomical level. And I don't even know if they're letting the prisoner garbage pickup program work anymore. They seem to be shutting that down. That's probably too much abuse to prisoners. So you can adopt a road yourself and work on cleaning up the road, volunteering, because I know you can do that and go out and volunteer to pick up garbage on the side of the road. But yeah, it's ridiculous. I used to think New York was bad when I lived there years ago, and Seattle's striving to be worse than Manhattan ever was, even under the Dinkins administration, when it comes to garbage on the side of the road. Stephanie Lauer, you got a question here, and I'm getting down to the end here, guys, so I'll winding this up the last couple questions. Mike was asking about Ferguson lawsuit against Tim Eyman. Curious also. Okay. That lawsuit is essentially over, but not complete. Like, there's a couple little things that are still being debated and argued. And obviously they've appealed to the feds, which is a very difficult bar or threshold to get over. So, Eyman's just deep in the hole on a ridiculous and absurd political persecution, the likes of which I don't think our state's ever seen before. In fact, there's no comparison on an individual scale. So it's really, he's in tough shape. I mean, I talk to him, I see him at events sometimes. It's amazing that guy keeps going. Let's see. Mike, you got a question. What minimum size group would be required for teaching public records request classes in Pacific County? I'd probably come out to Pacific County, just try to get at least 20 some odd people together. It makes who are interested. It doesn't have to be just public records either. We could do public records, how to use a PDC, how to organize local groups to be more effective on policy issues, and how to set up a local website to report crime stats, say, for example. I'd be happy to cover any and all those topics. And I love going out to Pacific County. It's a little ways away, but I'm happy to do that. The Reaper Sun, not sure if you talked about this already, but any word on the proposed Democrat restrictions ban on natural gas in Washington State? Yeah, I haven't looked at it in the last week or so, but there's been a lot of drama back and forth, efforts to try to take away the gas, stuff that gets thrown out in court, the national fight, which is bigger, that's been going on, and it's going to be one of the things that we'll have to see what actually comes out of the legislature. But it's this ongoing bizarre effort to really make a big impact here on reducing your ability to have options in your home. If there's one group that's anti-choice, it seems to be our political class, especially the Democrats in the state. That seems to be what they're focused on right now. So I'm going to have to close this right now. I got a long drive tonight up to Bellingham. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in Skagit, Whatcom County tomorrow. And looking forward to seeing everybody in Marysville on Thursday and San Juan County on Saturday. And if you're in one of those other meetings that we have in between now, those groups, also looking forward to seeing you as well. Just remember, if you want to support me, please feel free to go to wethegovern.com. You can actually donate to me directly there. You can subscribe to my website. I haven't sent out a lot of emails on that subscription channel yet, but you'll probably be getting more as this year goes forward. And anyway, so there's just a lot going on right now. Next week, I'll try to be back on more of a regular schedule. Tuesday, it's just the way these things worked out this week. This is just how it went. So Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for asking all these great questions. And just remember the same thing I always say and end all my videos with. The future belongs to those who show up, and showing up in your local community, getting to know your neighbors, making an impact where you live. That's going to be, ultimately, that's the thing that changes over time, and it makes the biggest impact and the biggest difference. So with that, guys, we'll see you next time. And if I'm going to see you in person this week, we'll see you soon.